Stephanie. Ready? Good evening. This is Mike LaFavors, Superintendent, Boyle County Schools. And I'd like to thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedules to join us tonight on this virtual town hall about reopening of school in August of 2020. So the purpose of tonight is we're not going to unveil a plan. We're not to that point yet. We think we have some time before we need to do that. And the summer is going to teach us a lot. And so we look forward to paying attention to what the coronavirus does once it gets hot and humid in Kentucky. And so that's really not what we're trying to achieve tonight. What we're trying to achieve is to create a conversation with you and to show you some of our thinking about how we would reopen school, get your comments on that, and then we will continue planning and preparing over the next month or so, and then get back together with you at the beginning of July. And I'll give you real firm dates before we get off tonight about what our next steps will be. But by the time we get with you next time, we will have a firm plan. I would like to thank on the call I've got with me tonight, Susan Taylor behind the scenes and Matt Whitlock. I've got Stephanie Wade, who will be handling your questions. And I'll let Stephanie talk about how she will do that.
Well, thank you again for joining us. We're glad to have you, and we really value your feedback. We do have a couple of ways. We had some questions that were pre-submitted via the Google form, and we have access to those. We also, you'll notice there is a chat window open for you on the side of the video. So if you feel free to enter any questions that you have there. And throughout the program, I'll be monitoring those questions along with some of my other colleagues, and we'll get those answered the best we can. So again, feel free. It's the chat box to the right of the video window. So with that, Mike,
thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Well, so we'll get started. So the first thing I'd like to say to you all is just thank you. Obviously, it goes without saying, this has been an unprecedented time. Everybody has, sacrificed and lost and had to make adjustments over the last 2.5 months or so. But I will say this, as a school system, what the students have done, and a lot of help from their parents and with the great staff behind them as well, we have literally pivoted from a NTI type format much closer to a virtual academy of sorts. It's been impressive to watch. And so as you see these pictures we're scrolling through, they just speak to all the things that have happened, not just instructionally, but also with food service. We were delivering the number of meals we delivered to homes in the community was just off the charts. And I think Katie Ellis and her team, what they did with that. But just really, the staff was all hands on deck. Our students were as focused as ever, and then they had the great parents and community behind them. And because of all that, I feel like it was a success in a difficult time. And I wanted to thank you all for that. So you can see we're going to continue on with a few more pictures here, and then we'll get into some of the content for tonight. I will plug graduation. We have our graduation parade tomorrow night at 8, and we're showing that graduation, I believe, is at 6. Stephanie, am I correct about that? 6 o'clock tomorrow, the graduation?
I actually think it's 5, Mr. LaFavors, and then followed by the parade and fireworks at 8.
Very good. So there are some unknowns. The first being, we don't know what mandates the governor will put on us. That's one of the reasons I think, making a decision now is just too early. We need to see what mandates come from the governor's office, what mandates come, if there are any, from the commissioner's office, Commissioner of Education. We also don't know what the impact of the summer will be on COVID-19. Some experts say it might get wiped out this summer. I think we're all hopeful that that's what happens. Others say that the summer will act as a backstop against COVID-19, meaning it'll slow it down. So your case count will go, from in Kentucky, we've been averaging 200 or 250 most of the last couple months. maybe it's a much, much lower number when it gets hot and humid. And then the third thing people say, some experts say, is that it will have no impact on it at all. And the fact is, we just don't know what's going to happen yet. So, we're going to take the month of June and kind of watch what's happening with the coronavirus, see what's coming out of the governor's office, see what guidance we get from the Kentucky Department of Education. And we feel like by the end of June, we'll be in a position to create a really good plan. And these are some of the questions people have asked me. And I know maybe if you read this list of questions, maybe these are some of the questions on your mind. This is not an exhaustive list, certainly. There are other questions people will have. We're not going to answer all these questions tonight, just to be honest with you. We are thinking through all these things. And at some point in the very near future, we will have to have answers for them. The next town hall, which we'll announce the date and time of that at the end of the call, we'll have answers for all these questions by then. But just so you know, we won't have them tonight. Not all of them. We've had a committee that's been working for about 3 weeks. And the goal really is to get feedback from the staff, which we had a staff town hall last week. And then, of course, this one tonight. And we're going to try to find some ways to get some student feedback in there as well. And then take that information back to the committee. And I'll tell you specifically tonight how you can give us feedback that the committee can consider. And then we're going to consider obviously what's coming out of the governor's office, the Kentucky Department of Education, as I said. We're going to pay attention to other school districts. I noticed that many countries are now going back to school. So we're going to be watching Australia and France and Norway and South Korea recently have their students going back. So we're paying attention to that as well. All that together will help us to make decisions. One thing that we did recently, we surveyed you all about a couple of different start dates, several questions. We're going to run through the data on that now. And whenever we do survey you, just so you know, we really listen to what you tell us. And it impacts how we pivot, which direction we go. And you can see we had a great number of responses from parents, 743, a lot of students as well. And the first question was August 12th or August 3rd. Now, the calendar committee and the board have already approved the start date of August 12th. And the earliest we felt like we could ask you about, and the Kentucky Department of Education asked us to consider an earlier start date, with the logic being that if the summer is a backstop against the coronavirus, slows the virus down, take advantage of the hot summer months. And so the earliest we felt comfortable asking you about was August 3rd. The reason for that is because of the new middle school. We feel like we can open the new middle school on August 3rd, but really we think much earlier than that would be difficult. So we asked this question to you, and resoundingly, all stakeholders said leave the date alone, and that's what we plan to do. We also asked you about adding minutes to the end of the school day. It's a pretty powerful tool because if you add 30 minutes to the end of the school day, you gain 11 days. So instead of 172 days of instruction, you only need 161 to achieve the 1,062 hours mandated by the legislature. However, we currently do not have approval from the legislature to go below 170 days. So what they typically do in difficult years where you have a lot of snow is they'll eliminate the 170-day requirement and only make you live up to the 1,062-hour requirement. They did that this past school year too. That's how we got out of school earlier, is by taking advantage of only having to adhere to 1,062 hours. So what you all are telling us is if the legislature were to give us that permission, that we should take it. Because if you see there, you see the parents favorable in blue, and then I think the yellow is we're still considering it. And the staff was in the same position. The students were the ones who least liked the 30 minutes added to the end of the day or into the school day. But nonetheless, we would seriously consider adding the minutes if the legislature gives us the green light on that. This was just about where would the minutes be added, and you can see the data is somewhat split on how you would do that. This talks about fall break, and you can see people do not like the concept of eliminating fall break really at all, including parents. but staff, really students very much do not want us touching their fall break. And so we're not planning to do that. But we did think we would ask the question. And then we asked about shortening it, and that was a more mixed bag. But at this time, we're not planning to shorten fall break either. But that's one that if you look at the data, we could consider, and we may go back to that one at some point. Spring break, I think spring break people are more passionate about than fall break. And so based on this data, we are not planning to eliminate spring break. And shortening it, people are very strong about that as well. So again, when we ask these kinds of questions of you in a survey, we really look at the responses you give us. And likewise, tonight, hopefully you'll give us some feedback tonight when this is over, and we're going to consider that just as much. Now, this is one question we haven't yet asked, and that's the idea of a late start. And a late start defined by the legislature is the first Monday closest to August 25th. This year, that's August the 24th. What that allows you to do is it allows you to not have to worry about the 170-day requirement, but only the 1,062-hour requirement. So again, if you go this route, you probably add the 30 minutes on because you'd actually have permission to do that at that time. But obviously, we're also losing time because we're scheduled to start on August 12th, and we wouldn't be starting until August 24th. We would lose 8 days of instruction to gain 11. So the net gain for us would be 3 days. So we haven't asked you all this question yet, and I would like for you to really think about this one tonight and give us some information about it on the form that we're going to tell you about at the end of the call or the end of the town hall tonight. Please give us some information on this possibility. Now, we're going to stop here just for a second before we get into learning options. And Stephanie, do we have any other questions on the calendar?
We do have a few questions that would have implications for the calendar. And the first one was, how will you handle after-school sports and clubs with an extended day?
Yeah, and Mark Wade, the high school principal, he's part of the reopening of school committee. And he has talked about that a little bit. And so that is a factor. There's no question about it. Because if you just tack it on to the end of the day, you're talking about practices going way up into the evening. So I think our coaches would have to be thoughtful about that. Try to just compress a 2-hour schedule into a 90 minutes or, something like that. Obviously getting to games, you would get there later as well. So all these things have to be thought through once we make a final decision on, whether or not we use the 30-minute option.
Okay, another question that's similar is, when will fall sports be allowed to start? You mentioned the start date of school. What about fall?
So fall sports, really that decision will be made by the Kentucky High School Athletic Association. They'll give districts the green light to begin practicing. And once we can practice, then we'll be able to have games. Now, the thing we don't know is, will they give us any guidance about spectators, or will we have to live stream the events? And we don't know if we'll get guidance from them on that, or if we'll have to make a decision on that on our own. But regarding practicing and playing games, the KHSAA will make that decision for us. Any other questions, Stephanie, before we move on?
There's a couple of questions about buses. Do you want to get to that later?
Let's come back. Let's go to that later. Yeah. So we'll go to the next slide.
Okay.
And we're still going to get to your all's questions before we get off here tonight. The next one is the one, this is really important for the reopen of school committee. The feedback we get from you all here is very, very important. These are the 4 options we're considering at this time for next school year. Well, the first one is the regular school option, which is just simply do what we've always done, right? Go to school. Maybe you have some minor provisions for more sanitizing more, a tighter cleaning schedule, but not much more than that. Now, the only way you could do go to regular school, I think, is if the summer wipes the coronavirus out. Short of that, that probably will not be what we do on August 12th. But I wanted you to know that's still something we're considering. We're paying attention to the coronavirus. We're hoping that first option is the one we get to use. It doesn't seem like at this time that's going to be it, but you don't know. We've got to see what the heat and humidity does to the coronavirus. The second one is if the governor says you must shelter in place. He gave a shelter-in-place order this spring. He could do that again in the fall. I don't think that's likely to happen, but it could, and it probably, again, will depend on what happens with the coronavirus over the next month and a half or so. The third one is what we're calling the opt-in hybrid, which is that some students would be in the physical school. Probably most students would be selecting that school. And at the physical school, there would be, we would take a lot of steps to keep kids safe in terms of social distancing. And there probably would be some masks being used. Anytime we couldn't achieve social distancing, we would require the students and staff to wear masks in the opt-in hybrid. A lot of just hand washing and sanitizing surface tops, rethinking large gatherings of students in gymnasiums for assemblies and things like that. There'll be a lot of accommodations in the opt-in hybrid for the physical school, and then there would be a virtual option for families and students who are not comfortable because maybe they've got pre-existing conditions or someone in their home has pre-existing conditions and they want to select the virtual academy. And then what we would do in the opt-in hybrid is we would create an unbelievably good virtual school. It would be very, very close to what we're capable of doing at the physical school. We feel like we're moving in that direction already. We're learning how to do that based on March, April, and May. Now look, I'm a fan of what we do at school, the socialization of it, very important. That face-to-face interaction, I'm a fan of it. And I think it's the best thing that we can do for our kids. But in the opt-in hybrid, we would present a virtual option that is as close to the physical school as possible and take the burden off of parents and connect the teacher right to the kids. And I think we learned how to move much closer to that this spring. So that's what the opt-in hybrid will look like. Now, the opt-in hybrid probably is put in place if the coronavirus has continued on through the summer in some substantial way. Many cases in Kentucky over and over and over again every single day. But we don't have a shelter-in-place order from the governor. That's when we would seriously start looking at the opt-in hybrid. Now, this last option is one that my team, we've had some problems with, the AB schedule, which you may have heard about. It's the idea that if you've got, use Woodlawn as an example, 550 students, you'd have 225 of them come on Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday, and the other 225 students go on Tuesday, Thursday, and every other Friday. The concept behind it is it helps you social distance. It reduces the number of students in the building. Therefore, social distancing becomes easier. But there are a lot of problems with it. Imagine if let's say you've got a first grader and a fourth grader in your house, and you've got a job, and the husband and wife both have jobs. Well, we're saying 2 to 3 days a week, you've got your first and fourth grader at home. So how do you go to work? I think it becomes very difficult on families for that reason. Also, the continuity of instruction. Students will learn on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at the school building. There would need to be some kind of virtual option on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. However, I assume in that model that their instructor is now working with the other half of their class on those days. So how do you have continuity of instruction? So there's a lot of questions to the AB schedule that we would have to think through and be comfortable with before we would seriously consider it. At this time, I put it on the table just because I know, listening to some state officials recently, that the social distancing requirements that are going to be very strict and arduous. And so for us figuring those out, we may have to use that. I mean, the AB schedule concept, but it's not our favorite at the moment. The ones we prefer are the first three on this list. Stephanie, do we have any questions about learning options for 2020?
We have several, Mike. Some of them I think you've already kind of answered. So I'm going to ask for some clarification on a few of them. We have several questions about cleaning of the buildings. So if we go back to the learning option of regular school for those who choose to do that, how often are the schools going to be cleaned and the surfaces cleaned as well?
That's a great question. So I think we're really probably focusing on the opt-in hybrid, where you've got some students in the physical school, some students at the virtual academy. The coronavirus did not get slowed down that much over the summer. That's probably the option. Again, we haven't selected that option yet. I want to be clear about it. We haven't selected any of these to be what we're going to start with on August 12th yet. We're wanting the coronavirus to tell us over the next month before we make our selection. But, I think you would have to do deep cleaning of the building every single evening, and the buses as well, because the coronavirus does stay on some surfaces longer than the flu. So you would have to do that. Also, if you change classes, the countertops, the tops of the desks all have to be cleaned between every class. Now, there's another concept out there where the students stay in the same classroom and the teachers rotate to them, which probably works really well in intermediate, which is 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and pretty good in the middle school, I would think. High school, maybe not. So, there's going to be a lot involved in that. The reopening of school committee has all these subcommittees, and one of them is just about the physical school option and the opt-in hybrid. How do you do that? And they're thinking through disinfecting and cleaning, and they're building real specific plans on that. And so if we do at our next town hall in July announce that that's what we're doing, we'll also give you all the information about how we're going to get the buildings clean. Any other questions there, Stephanie?
Okay, yes. We have some questions about recess. There seems to be a concern about recess and also social interaction for the kids. And so they're asking, will students still be allowed to have recess? And will there be, I guess, some unstructured social times as there are on, quote unquote, regular school?
So I think we're still thinking through unstructured social time. I will say physical activity is very important, and so we're going to have to figure that one out. And I think recess could be one of the ways you try to guarantee that, daily or at least several times per week. So I think there will be some form of recess. But again, I'll wait for the subcommittee who's doing this work to speak to that. If that's the option we select, the opt-in hybrid. For the regular school option, then you have recess like you always do. I mean, the regular school option is literally what we've always done with school. So if we have that option as the one on August 12th, then absolutely, you'll do it like you've always done it. But in the opt-in hybrid, it will look a little bit different.
There's another question about, has there been any thought to a schedule similar to what many universities are adopting for this fall? And that's basically starting school, but then ending the quote unquote regular school for the semester at Thanksgiving and then not opening up until mid-January.
We actually did play that one out where you start earlier. We actually built one where you take 4 months off, the cold and flu season. Basically, you take that off. Because one of the things that will happen is it'll become very confusing as to what is the ailment, right, during November, December, January, and February. So that one's been discussed, and I would love to see some feedback from parents on that one. We didn't go too far with it because we thought, again, working families, how do you tell them we're going to send your kids home for 4 months? Even if we tried to do some NTI days during that time, we thought that would be pretty tough. So we didn't go too far with it. We did build a sample schedule for that. And I would like to hear some comments on that from people.
There are a couple of questions about choosing the online option. We have several parents asking questions about, will it be a continuation of learning? Concerns about they don't want just remediation. Would there be new content taught? And would there be supports for that? Meaning that there is a virtual teacher, a teacher who is available virtually, but will also there be a staff member assigned to do even further check-in? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. So if we do the opt-in hybrid, which is what they're referencing there, it's going to be a continuation of learning. In other words, it's going to be like they're going to be on the same pace in terms of the curriculum as the physical school buildings teachers are on. And we've actually thought through two concepts for the opt-in hybrid. One is where you've only got a few families and children who select that option, 40 to 50 is kind of the number we were playing around with. And in that case, those 40 to 50 students would belong to teachers who are also teaching during in the physical school. Because you're talking about at Woodlawn, maybe there's 7 kids, right? So you're just going to take those 7 kids, maybe 2 of them are first graders, so those 2 have Amanda Godby. You say Amanda, and we might give Amanda Godby a stipend to support that so she can work with those families during her planning period, and somehow we would live stream her classroom in there. We haven't gotten to the end on that, but we've been talking about that option. The other one is where there's 400 or 500 students who select that option, and we'd have to create some kind of virtual school at that point. We have teachers who are dedicated just to the virtual school. So we would have a first grade teacher dedicated to that, a second grade teacher dedicated to that. At the middle school and high school, we would have, science, social studies, math, language arts teachers dedicated to that school. So a lot of these questions we're still working through, but we just so you all can see the level of planning we're putting into it, we have thought through a very small virtual option and then one that would be very large. And that either of those based on the number of people who tell us that's what they want to do. Maybe one more question and we'll move on to the next, and we'll catch some of these at the end, Stephanie.
Okay, just for clarity, Mike, if you don't mind, could you clarify the opt-in, and would it be available for any parents that would like it, and for any reason? Just reiterate, would parents be given a choice? That question is continuing to pop up.
And I think the answer right now we would say is yes. We would give anyone the choice if that's where we end up landing. And so to clarify it further is just simply to say, the opt-in hybrid is what we would present to you all in July. If the coronavirus has continued on, there is no shelter-in-place order from the governor. We know there's a lot of people nervous about next school year. And so we've got some students and families who say, we want our kids in the physical school building. We know you all are going to take precautions. We trust that you'll do that. We've got others who are saying, for one reason or the other, I'm nervous about it. Could you provide a virtual option? And then we would find out from you all who's going to be in which of those 2 learning environments. And we would create equally powerful learning environments for kids in both of those 2 options. And that's what that one looks like. Again, we're not committing to that today because we don't know what the coronavirus is going to do this summer. And it's going to be more difficult to pull that off for us than, honestly, the first 2, regular school or shelter in place. Opt-in is almost like you're doing the first 2 together at the same time. It will be more complicated. But if that's where we are and that's what we need to do, we'll do it. You all, I think the people on the call know us, know Boyle County Schools, and know how committed we are to their children. And so, we'll do it. But it's the more difficult option. And for that reason, we want a little more information to tell us that's the one we have to select. Let's move on, Susan, and then Stephanie, we'll come back to questions at the end. So a little bit about our budget, just so you know, this school year is ending about flat. So the revenue and expenditures are going to balance out perfectly this year. You would think, when you've emptied buildings out for a few months, the energy cost savings, you would think, well, you'd end up with a net gain. But then, the food service aspect cost a lot of money to deliver all that food, more than was budgeted. And a lot of it came out of what we call our general fund, which are dollars that can be spent on anything. And so that was more expensive. All of the material prep for NTI, we mailed, some of those packets home. The technology expense related to NTI was greater than we were anticipating earlier in the school year. So we did save some money in a few areas, but then other things cost more. So this year is going to come out at about a flat year in terms of the budget. Now we have been minding the budgets very well for years now, and we've got a large cash reserve, and that's going to help us as we go into next school year. And so I want you all to know that we are in good financial shape. We can do whatever is necessary for your students. In terms of catch up from this school year, I know that as good a job as we did, there's some ground we need to make up with some students in some areas, and we intend to do that. Whatever it takes for next school year to be successful, we have the funds to do both those things, to take care of gaps that were created in March, April, May, and to create a tremendous school year next year, we have the funds to do that. In addition to that, the CARES Act generated a good amount of money for the school district. Not as much as you would think, but nonetheless a substantial amount, and we'll use that money to help those two objectives: overcome some things that happened in March, April, May, and get ready for next school year. So I just wanted you all to know that. Stephanie, you probably don't have any questions on budget, but if we do, we'll stop and answer those real quick.
No questions on budget that are budget specific. There are a few questions that require money, but I think you're going to cover those later. So we'll just keep moving on.
Keep moving on. We want to tell you all about our summer hours because you may want to reach us with questions. And so here's a little bit about that. Your schools will be open, elementary and middle school through June 5th and high school through June 12th. We've asked them to at least be able to answer phones. You see there 8:30 to 12. The central office will be open. You can see the days and times there every day of the week, at least 8 to noon, and then Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, 8 to 3:30. And you can call us there. If you want to reach me, just call the office. We're all working from home until July 6th. On July 6th, we plan to go back to work in our physical locations. But you can easily reach me by calling that number, and then they'll send the message for me to return your call onto my cell phone. Also, you can email me, mike.lefevers@boyle.kyschools.us, and I'll get back to you that way also. So we've talked a little bit about the challenges for the coming year, not only trying to overcome some gaps that occurred, even though we did a great job, I feel like, in the spring of 2020. We know that's going to be part of what we have to do next school year. It also, we could be moving between learning modes. We could start the year in a regular school. Let's say the coronavirus gets wiped out, you're in regular school, but then it comes back in the fall and the governor puts a shelter in place on you, and then you do that, and then you come out of that, and you could even end up now opt-in at some point. I mean, so it could be really just like us trying to pivot between different learning modes. I could see that as a possibility. So we're trying to make sure we have plans right now for all of them. And then each of these learning modes is challenging in and of itself. Just if you take on any of those four I named, they each require crazy in-depth planning. So it's going to be a challenging year. It's one we're up to. I want the parents to know that. My staff, I feel like the leaders in the district, the teachers, the support staff, they're up to the challenge. Our budget's in good place to overcome obstacles that we may face. We feel like we're up to the challenge. The challenges will be great. And one more, I think there may be one more slide, and then we'll take any additional questions. So this is the timeline I promised you. Today being May 28th, we're going to ask that there will be on our website a form that you can fill out to give us information you want us to consider. And we will consider every single statement, thought that you have. The committee will on June 11th. That's the next time that the reopening of school committee meets, June 11th at 1:00. So between today and June 10th, if you would give us that information, we'll be taking all that in with us into that meeting on June the 11th. And then we're going to continue to meet through June. Our last big meeting is July 6th. On that day, we plan to make a decision. And then we're going to tell staff of that decision in the morning of July 10th. And we're going to have something available for the community at 4:00 on July 10th. And so that's our plan. Our plan is consider lots of information from parents, students, community leaders, our staff. Listen to the governor, listen to the commissioner of education. Pay attention to what districts in Kentucky are planning to do across the nation, across the world, what they're doing, how effective it is. Really pay attention to the coronavirus. And then on July 6th, make a decision and announce that decision on July the 10th. That's the plan right now. And so we love to get your feedback. Today through June 10th is a great opportunity for you to give us that feedback. But of course, you can reach me at any time during the month of June. Just simply an email or call our office, and you and I can talk about it. I think that's it. We're down to some questions and answers. So maybe, Stephanie, we'll do 10 or 15 minutes here of questions and answers, and then we'll get off the call tonight.
Okay, Mike. What I've done is I've grouped these questions kind of thematically. So the first few questions are really more about the school environment rather than instruction. The first one is, will there be any way to include more fresh air circulation in the school buildings? I guess I'm assuming to mitigate virus transmission.
So, our air conditioning units are all fresh air handlers. So they bring fresh air and circulate it through the buildings already. But, most of the classrooms have windows, not all, but most of them do. We would encourage the teachers to utilize those. Also, I think the idea that you could have some outdoor classroom experiences. Now, in this day and age of safety, we've got to think through that. But it's certainly, I don't want kids to feel like they've got to stay inside the building all day long. So I think all those things are possible.
Okay, great. Next question is, will the school district require students take the vaccine in order to attend whenever that is available?
I was on a call with the governor's health official Stack Tuesday, and he indicated he didn't feel like there was going to be a vaccine before January at the earliest. So I don't know where that's going to land. So I would say at this time that would be a no. We won't require the vaccine certainly to start school in August. Now, if there's 320 million vaccines available in America at some point in late winter, early spring, then we would take a serious look at that at that time. But I know there are people maybe on the call who are really anti-vaccine, and I'm sure there'll be some kind of accommodations by the legislature for those individuals. I don't know that, but I would assume as such. So, right now I'm focused on how you start school, and I don't believe a vaccine is going to come into play for August 12th.
Okay, the next question is also a health-related question. Will temperatures be monitored for students? Will students be required to have their temperature taken upon entry, and will they be monitored?
Yeah, so the subcommittee that's dealing with that, the physical school building and the opt-in option, they've got detailed plans. I've read through them, and that's one of the things they do talk about in the plans. So none of that's been decided for certain yet. We still have several planning meetings between now and July 6th, and we'll make final decisions on what that would look like. Love to get your feedback on that from anybody on the call tonight. But that is something that I saw on that subcommittee's plan that is being considered.
Okay, then one was, you mentioned mask and PPE. Will mask be required for students?
If I understood the governor's health official Stack yesterday, the recommendation they're making on that is to create social distancing 6 feet or greater. And anytime you cannot create that social distancing, then you should have mandatory masks. So I think something like that would probably carry forward in the opt-in option. Again, we may not be using that option when we start school. That's not the one we hope to be using, but that's the one that we're obviously going to put a lot of planning into that possibility. But yeah, I think masks are pretty powerful against this virus. It does appear. And so I think they'll play a big part in any plan we have for the opt-in hybrid.
All right. The next one's kind of address more instructional questions. And the first one is, there's some concern about some gaps students may have. And if a parent were to do the opt into virtual, would there be accommodations for special education students to go further than what they did in the spring?
Absolutely. I'll say this, if you pick the opt-in virtual, not only will there be accommodations for special ed students during next school year, but we'll have to do some gap remediation, perhaps, if the student needs it. The data tells us that the student needs it for what happened this spring, and we'll do all that regardless if you're in the physical building or in the virtual environment.
Okay, we have a couple other questions again that are involving instruction. For the opt-in to virtual, if they were to opt into virtual, will there be more evening availability for Zoom study groups, Google Meet study groups? Will there be supports in the evenings for children whose parents work?
Well, our goal, number one, is for the teacher and the student to create a relationship in the class, to have a relationship similar to the physical environment. So we're hoping that the parent doesn't feel like they're having to, you know, be almost like a co-teacher, so to speak. So we're hoping that's not the feeling at all. I don't know how the schedule would work yet. We haven't gotten that far into it to say how we would do that. I can imagine that some of the content would be recorded and therefore could be watched at any time. But a lot of this, we also want to create a live classroom environment, and so I would imagine that would be during the school day. But again, the goal there would be to take the burden off the parent.
Okay, very good. One of the questions you mentioned earlier, fall sports and following KHSAA. I think KHSAA issued some statements today. Parents are wondering, will we issue information about fall sports before July 10th based on KHSAA recommendations?
If we have and I didn't see that today, so I'm glad to hear that. I'll check that out. I know they put something out about like little leagues and things like that, but nothing yet that I saw on high school or even middle school sports. But yeah, as soon as KHSAA makes their decision, we'll make sure that all of our coaches know that and we move forward. We're going to move forward as quickly as we're allowed to.
There seems to be some questions about bus transportation. So if parents choose for their students to come to regular school, what precautions will be taken on the bus, and is that a possibility?
Yeah, so we're going to take great precautions there. What we've been planning on, I'll just tell you what we've been planning on, and what Dr. Stack said on Tuesday was a little bit different than what we've been planning on. We have been planning around the idea of one student per seat. Now, if you're in the same family, you can sit together, but otherwise it's one student per seat in the opt-in hybrid, right? Regular school, we would have multiple students sitting in each seat. So we're talking about the opt-in hybrid here. That's what we've been planning on, one student per seat, thinking that, the bus has really tall seat backs. And so we thought that would provide some protection. Now, what Dr. Stack talked about on Tuesday was that you would have a student every other seat. So that's different. So when we get back together, the Reopen School Committee and a subcommittee that's working on that, we have a subcommittee working specifically on transportation. Chris Holderman's the chair of that subcommittee. We're going to talk through those details. And then also disinfecting, when students leave the bus, cleaning those buses thoroughly. That's part of the plan. But yeah, transportation is a real key part.
Okay, we have a couple of questions about absences. How will absences work, and will there be more leniency for absences? Currently, maybe each school I think is a little different, but maybe they have 6 parent notes. Will we look at possibly being more lenient with absences for students who have illness or have had exposure?
It's a great question. It's actually one I haven't, in all the subcommittee notes I've read, I don't think I've seen that. So Susan, she's behind the scenes here tonight. If you don't care, make note of that. Make sure our next meeting, we consider that option. I know what the board policy is right now. We would have to do something there to give more leniency with board policy. So that I don't believe is being considered yet. And this is part of why we're having the town halls, right? I mean, we're thinking through a lot of different aspects, but that one I don't believe in any of the subcommittees have I seen anything on that yet.
Mr. LaFavors, we have a really great question about, is the choice they make, whether it's regular school or opt-in, if that's what we decided as a district to do, is there fluid in their choice? meaning could they opt to do virtual for the first 9 weeks, but then change to regular school once they felt more comfortable or maybe were no longer?
I definitely think that's going to be a possibility. Yeah. Now I think you'll have to give us some notice that you're transitioning from one to the other. We've actually talked about that in our reopen school committee. We've talked about that very thing. So yeah, I don't think there's any doubt. If you started the school year in the virtual academy and you become more comfortable, let's say after fall break, and you want to transition into the physical school, or vice versa, I think that there'll be some accommodations for that.
Okay, another one, a good one, Mike, is have we considered being more flexible with drop-off times so that working parents could have their kids be car riders to ease the burden on bus?
I don't know if I fully understand that question with drop-off times.
I think they're meaning would the school buildings be open any earlier so that parents would have more flexibility in drop-off times?
That's another thing we haven't considered yet. So Susan, let's make note of that. Take that to the committee for sure as well. That we haven't discussed that. The question would be, can we get enough staff there to supervise students, especially since we're having to adhere to social distancing? That would be the question, but we'll play that out.
All right. Will there be required COVID testing for staff or students before starting in-person instruction?
Tough thing about testing is it's good for the minute you take the test, right? And then you go back out into the school environment. And I don't know that testing is going to get us what we need. I thought the antibody testing would, but then there was a report from CDC that it's only if you show positive antibodies, it's only 50% accurate. So I was more hopeful about that one, but I don't know that the testing is going to, what the testing does, I think, is it says a student, so let's say a student tests positive or a parent does, it tells you who to quarantine. But I don't know that trying to do some kind of 2,700 student, 400 staff testing, I don't know how good that would be. Listen, I'm open-minded to it. It's not that I'm not open-minded to the idea. I just guess I'd have to figure out how often will we have to do that for it to be effective. Like, is it once a week? And then is it even feasible in terms of a cost structure? And can we even get that many tests to do that? I guess there'll be a lot of questions for me on that one, but it's not that we're not open-minded to it. We just, at this moment, I don't know how we would do that feasibly.
All right, switching back to instructional. What about parent tutorials on using the virtual classroom? Could you offer those so that parents can better assist their children?
Another great point. I don't think I've seen that in any of the notes. Susan, let's make note of that. That's a good thing for us to think through. I like it.
Okay, and would we be willing to, or would you be willing to host a town hall for kids to get their feedback?
We talked about we need student feedback in this process, and several members of the team I was discussing this with, and so we're contemplating how to get student feedback, and I do think we'll do something there before mid-June. We're going to try to figure something out.
Will desks in the classroom have to be at least 6 feet apart?
As I understand it, in the opt-in hybrid, the answer is yes. So we have been looking at different designs of classrooms that can achieve the most students. And I think we'll be able to figure something out there. I'm pretty confident that it may require some creativity, but I think we can achieve social distancing in the classroom.
Okay, Mike, there was a lot of great questions. There's also a lot of great comments. I did include in the comments that we will monitor and read every single comment. And Susan is also going to be sending the form that allows them to give feedback. But otherwise, I don't think that we have any questions that you haven't addressed.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I want to thank everyone who participated tonight. I think what we do great in Boyle County, many things, but one thing is we work together, and we're all working for the same common good, which is our students, your children. And I really appreciate the partnership. We couldn't do it without you. And I appreciate you taking time tonight with us. And again, the next town hall will be on the 10th of July, 4 p.m. And we expect to have final answers for you and a very detailed plan that we will reveal at that time. So thanks again. Have a good night.